Dane Brugler, NFL draft expert, analyst, and a great story. And from theathletic.com joins me, David Smoke, 365 Sports. Do you ever go through a post-draft depression?
It's a weird feeling because you do all this work for this 3-day period, and then all of a sudden it's over. And so it's not about getting it right or wrong in the draft. I care more about getting it right or wrong 3 years from now. But just understanding why teams did what they did. And then also it's just a lot of looking towards next year. But instead of projecting these guys, it's fun to look back and see, okay, where did they land? What was the reasoning? The teams tell us what they're thinking based on their draft picks. They tell us what they're thinking based off of the money they spent in free agency, and they tell us what they're thinking through their picks they make over the 3 days of the NFL draft. And so it's always interesting to look back on that and kind of examine it through that lens.
Did anyone, well, I know everybody improves themselves because they're adding talent. There's always a controversial pick or something. But in your opinion, was this, despite some of the changes in the first round and some of the stories, was this a pretty safe draft for most everybody?
Yeah, it was a unique draft because we only had two quarterbacks in the first round, and I think there was a lot of differing opinions from team to team about how certain positions were stacked. And so, we saw a lot of offensive linemen go early. It wasn't a super strong offensive line class, but there were some good players at the top and left without a chair. So a lot of offensive linemen went quickly. No surprise there. I think that every draft has its own identity. And this one, when we look back, we're going to look back at the defensive linemen. And then I think we're going to look back at, maybe some of the quarterbacks and say, okay, Cam Ward at number 1 overall, obviously we're going to look at him. But, hey, did Jackson Dart work out for the Giants? What about the next group of quarterbacks? Tyler Shough for the Saints. What about, Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland, obviously. There's a lot of controversy around that. So I think it's going to be interesting looking back 2-3 years from now on these quarterbacks and say, hey, we were right. This was not a good quarterback class.
When did Tyler Shough show up on your radar?
So watching him throughout the season this past year, because he was a high recruit when he started out at Oregon, goes to Texas Tech, and did some fine things there before the injuries kind of derailed things for him. And then he goes to Louisville, and it was like, okay, this is an interesting fit with Coach Braum and that offense. It's like, okay, we might have something here. And I think throughout the season, you think about the Notre Dame tape, think about some of the game played at, but it's a 26-year-old quarterback, and okay, it's a unique situation with the injuries and just everything involved with his story, his background. And I just know when we were getting ready for the Senior Bowl, getting ready to go to Mobile, I did my Senior Bowl preview, and I said, look, Tyler Shough has a chance to be a top 50 pick. He has a chance to be one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in this draft. Just because of the skill set. And I think a lot of people turned off because of the age and, just the unique circumstances. But look, if you were 22 years old and a 4th-year senior, Tyler Shough would have been a top 20 pick. So it would have a discount because of his age and the injury history, just kind of a unique set of circumstances. So we'll see Shough pretty early for the Saints this year. And, because the Saints, they need to figure out what they have. They might be in a position next year to draft a quarterback very early. So they'll be doing a full evaluation on Shough this year to figure out, okay, is he someone we can win with moving forward? But because he was a 2nd-round pick, not a 1st-round pick, if they feel like they have to move on next year, they can do that.
Is it also a trend? You mentioned Shough's age, and of course he's been around. Bowman at Oklahoma State had been around a long, long time, and he's not in the NFL. But is the transfer portal and players now getting 4, 5, 6, sometimes longer years? Is the age as much of an issue now? You'd like to get a guy 2021, sure, but is that going to change a little bit?
Yeah, and I think that's teams have to evolve with what the college game is giving them, right? Like I remember it wasn't that long ago where the term air raid was like, oh, well, you can't draft that guy. Like the game is constantly evolving. The NFL has to evolve with it based off of just like college is evolving to what high schools are giving college teams. NFL needs to evolve what colleges are giving to NFL teams. And I do think that we had very few underclassmen this year. And part of that is the NIL and players feeling like they can go back to school, still get paid decent money, hold off the NFL for another year. So we will have more 22, 23, 24-year-olds drafted early than we have the past 10 years. There's no doubt about that. And especially quarterbacks. Carson Beck went back to school and transferred to Miami, and he'll be in next year's draft. We'll see how that plays out. But there's multiple positions where guys maybe, and this year is a good example. I mean, from a defensive tackle, went to the Steelers at 21 overall. He could have come out after his junior year, and who knows what he would have, maybe a third, fourth round pick. He transfers to Oregon instead, gets paid, and turns himself into a first round pick. So we're seeing more fourth year, fifth year players in the draft pool than past years, just because of NIL and transfer portal. And it'll be interesting how, because it seems like college is very much in a position of flux where they're trying to figure things out and regulation and all these different things. So the NFL will have to continue to evolve based off of how college game continues to change.
Dan, was there one player among those top 25 to 40 or whatever, 50, that might have been the most, not misunderstood, but a name or two that people had completely differing opinions on, that some loved him and some just didn't quite get it?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is Shamar Stewart, the defensive end from Texas A&M, who the traits are fantastic. 6'5", 270 pounds, and a 4.5 40, 40-inch vert, unbelievable traits. And we saw that at the Senior Bowl. You watch it on film and you see flat career sacks. It's just, it's tough. And so a lot of teams were like, okay, just not productive enough for us. Not a first round pick. Other teams look at the traits and say, hey, we can develop this. The scouting motto is traits over production. And Shamar Stewart is kind of the poster child for that. So, and the Bengals are one of those teams that look at it and said, there's just not many guys on this planet who can move like him, have this ability. Now it's up to our coaches to get more out of him. And so they made him a first round pick. That was a really interesting selection. Josh Simmons, a left tackle for the Chiefs, who, if not for, the interviews weren't great. The knee was a patella injury back in October. So there was a lot of split opinion on Simmons. And, if he were fully healthy, he would have been a top 15 pick. But some teams looked at the injury and said, that's just not going to work for us in the first round. So the Chiefs get him at the 32nd pick. And when we look back 2-3 years from now, Josh Simmons could end up being a steal. And because that's exactly what the Chiefs needed. They needed to address the tackle position, and they did so with a very talented player. Hopefully he's able to stay healthy.
There was always, it seemed like year after year, the Steelers had a good draft. They would let the draft come to them. They would never really extend too far. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. The Ravens seem to do that a lot. Is that now also, does that now include on that mantle the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah, that's a good short list of teams who have, it's no surprise whether good teams stay good, right? And it starts with ownership and, just a steady structure of their front office. And that leaks down to the draft and the way the roster management and the way they address certain positions. Now, it was surprising to see the Eagles draft a linebacker in the first round. That's against type. But as we look further, his post-draft press conference about Jahad Campbell, the Alabama linebacker they drafted in the first round, he said the word edge more than he said linebacker. I think there's a very good chance when we see Campbell on the field, he becomes the Micah Parsons for the Eagles. The Eagles see Micah Parsons twice a year. I'm sure they're tired of facing Micah Parsons. Jahad Campbell, it could be their version of that. And it makes sense when you look at Campbell, going back to high school, he was an edge rusher. That's how he was recruited. He didn't move the linebacker until he got to Tuscaloosa. So Jahad Campbell, I think that makes sense. There's some, but that's just, the Eagles are willing to roll the dice at that point. And I think your overall point's exactly correct. I mean, the teams, Steelers, Ravens, they allow the draft fall to them. They get good players. And this year, no different. Derek Hartman, who I mentioned, going to the Steelers, can be anywhere from the 1 technique to the 5 technique. He fits the Steelers perfectly up front. They needed to address the defensive line. He was one of my favorite players in this draft. And then the Ravens, the sit pat, later on in the first round and get Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, who maybe didn't have the production this year that teams were hoping to see, and that's why he went from it later in the first round. But he's a versatile, athletic player with high football character, and that just fits the Ravens exactly what they needed.
Cowboys, Booker at 12. There's still things that maybe they got to fill between now and when the season begins. What about what Will McClay? I know Steven, Jerry, and all the others get, and also Schottenheimer. His first team, like he had pretty good impact. What do you think they did? Did they get what they needed, or are they still a little bit empty in some places?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone would agree. There's certain positions they can continue to improve, and I'm sure they'll continue. And you look at running back, you look at receiver, you look at some of the spots on defense. It's corners, one of those positions they'll continue to look at. But you don't want to go into the draft hungry. You don't want to have to. It's like grocery shopping when you're hungry and you end up buying way more stuff than you should. It's kind of like that when you're the Cowboys. You have all these needs, but you don't want to reach for certain needs, certain positions. You want to let the draft fall to you. And I think once Tedero McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, once he was off the board, went number 8, eyes shifted to Tyler Booker. And, that's because when you have a top 12 pick, you want to draft the best players. Not you don't want to target a position. You want to draft the best players. Tyler Booker, the Cowboys believe, will be a Pro Bowler. And so even though we can argue guard, is that worthy of a top 12 pick? And you know what? In this draft, I think it was. And with Booker, even though the athletic traits don't jump off the page in terms of the combine testing and all that, when you watch his film, he does exactly what you want your guard to do. You maintain the depth of the pocket. He's able to push guys around and create run lanes. And so you drop him into that offensive line, and all of a sudden you feel like it's once again a strength to this offense. And for the Cowboys, that's exactly what they needed to give Dak the time to look downfield and find guys, open guys. And the running game we know is a little bit in flux. We'll see with Williams kind of poised to be the starter, but maybe they can use more help at running back. It'll be interesting to see how this offense functions.
Dane, has there been a franchise that has had a better facelift than the Washington Commanders since the ownership change? Jaden Daniels, they seem like now they kind of get the draft. And now the stadium news. Is there one that has changed so dramatically, so quickly than them?
The most underrated part of sports is how important ownership is. And I don't care what sport you're talking. I don't care if you're talking NFL, NBA, baseball, NASCAR. And that sets the tone for everything else. And for the Commanders, new ownership comes in. They hire the right people. You are lucky enough to be in a draft with a top quarterback when you're picking with one of the early picks. And all of a sudden, things are drastically different than they were 2 years ago. And so, if you're the Commanders, you have to be awfully optimistic about what's the trajectory of this organization moving forward. You feel like you have the quarterback, you feel like you have the owner, you have the coach, you have the GM. Now it's all about sprinkling in the pieces around pieces of the organization. And so, the Commanders are in a good spot. There's no doubt. It's if you're a Cowboys fan, an Eagles fan, a Giants fan, you liked the Dan Snyder ownership era because you felt like, all right, we're going to continue to compete and have a good chance to beat this team. Now, not so much. It's a different type of situation in Washington.
One more question on the Cowboys, and then question about next year, and then I know you got to go. Savone Revel, the kid from East Carolina that you look at him and all that, and the stories, injury, academics, ACL, whatever else. Cowboys draft guys who have been injured. They're not afraid of that. When will he be able to help them, and how really good was he on your list?
Well, going back to last August, entering the year, he was a top 20 pick on my way too early draft board. It had the ACL, and that's always tough. But the Cowboys, you're right, have never been scared of those guys on day 2 where there's a little bit of a risk, but we'll bet on the reward. And Ravel, I had so much fun covering him the last few months, talking to him, talking to his dad, talking to his story is fantastic. If people don't know the full story, I suggest checking out The Beast, my draft guide. You get all the details in there. But he's just not many 6'2", 200-pound corners who have 4.3 speed and have the ball skills that he offers. So he has yet to play his best football. It's just, can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? And the Cowboys need him. We don't know the situation exactly with Diggs and when he'll get back on the field. Deron Bland's entering a contract year. You hope they get that figured out, but you never know. Jordan Lewis is no longer on this team. So I think at some point, he's expected to start, be close to 100% in July when training camp gets going. So you hope it might not be immediate, but at some point during his rookie year, you hope Ravel is able to step in and kind of prove that he belongs to be on the field.
You mentioned the quarterbacks this year. My goodness, if you look forward, Dane, around the country, it's stacked. The Big 12, who we cover quite a bit, might have 3 to 5 guys that are highly drafted, or at least someone that people will look at. Is it the complete opposite, you think, you look forward to next year, the quarterback class, than this year?
Yeah, there's no Caleb Williams, Drake May necessarily, where it's like, oh yeah, these easy superstar, like those guys are going to be easy top pick. Now, Arch Manning maybe can be that guy. He has the hype, he has the last name. We just haven't seen enough to be able to say he'll be the guy. But I will say there's a lot of names, and a lot of them are pretty exciting. And you're right. There's some down where you are. I think just think about Arizona State and Sam Leavitt and what he was able to do. Obviously, no more Scadaboo, and that will be something they'll have to replace. But Sam Leavitt is him, and what he was able to do for the Sun Devils is really exciting. So eager to see him. There's some love for Avery Johnson, the Kansas State quarterback, and he's a dual threat guy. Scouts feel like he's just kind of scratching the surface. So there's a lot of quarterbacks next year that are really promising, and it's all about, all right, who's going to take that next step? Who's going to develop and prove that, hey, I'm a first round pick? And so it'll be interesting to see who's able to kind of pull ahead of the pack, because right now it feels like a really crowded group, and for a lot of NFL teams, that's music to their ears when we look towards next year's draft.
Dane, thank you very much. Get some rest. Appreciate your time. Dane Brugler, theathletic.com, on the draft. This is 365 Sports.